The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
You as a writer or a creator telling the very specific story of your very particular life throws open imaginative possibilities for your reader.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Daniel Grothe is a pastor, a rancher, and the author of The Power of Place, Choosing Stability in a Rootless Age. In his blurb of the book, Win Collier said, "We live in an ambitious age where all of society's energy prods us to move as fast as we can, as far as we can. Yet amid all this, here's Daniel Grothe with the audacity to suggest that it is often more courageous and more human to sit tight, stay low, and go deep." I caught up with Daniel to talk about embracing obligation, the value of thinking small, and the possibility that God is a materialist. Daniel Grothe, I'm so glad you are on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you, Jonathan Rogers. Happy to be here with you.
I loved your book, Power of Place, Choosing Stability in a Rootless Age. Now you've made some choices around stability. Moved out. You're one of those people. We always, everybody who reads Wendell Berry is tempted to go buy a farm, and you did it. Yeah. I assume you read Wendell Berry before you bought this place in this ranch.
Yeah, Wendell Berry has been an icon for me for a lot of years, but really it came from my grandparents. My grandparents in Idaho, my mom, both sides of her family tree have been longtime agrarians, people, salt of the earth farmers working the land out in northwest Idaho, right on the Snake River. Mm-hmm. And my great-grandfather immigrated over from Greece. His name was Hieronymus Athanasius Asmakopoulos. And he got on a boat when he was 12 in Monostraki, Greece, got on the Aegean Sea and headed over as he was the youngest of 10 kids. And his dad died and his mom put him on a boat and said, "You'll have a better life in America." So he showed up at Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty, 13 years old. And they said, "What's your name, boy?" And he wrote it on a little piece of paper, Hieronymus Athanasius Asmakopoulos. And they essentially said, "That's not going to work here." And so they gave him a phone book, and he opened it up to the most common last name and changed his name to Harry Smith.
Wow.
And he started working the railroads west, 13, 14, 15, meets a young girl in West Virginia. They fall in love, get married. She jumps on the railroad tracks with him. They go out west, and he's working all the way, saving all his money. And they get to Lapwai, Idaho, right on where the Snake meets the Clearwater River, and it's land that Lewis and Clark stayed on in their journey west. And they've got all the documentation of them, camping there. And So he said, well, this is where I stop. And he went to the Nez Perce Indian tribe, and he said, hey, I want to buy 2,000 acres. And they said, well, by federal law, the U.S. stole our land, but they tell us how much we can sell. So by federal law, we can only sell 140 acres. And so he said, well, I'm going to buy 2,000. So my grandma Wheezy lives on the land that Hieronymus bought. He wrote a letter to Washington, D.C., and my grandma Wheezy's 90, she's got a signed document from Vice President Grover Cleveland saying that the Nez Perce tribe can sell 2,000 acres to Hieronymus Assimacopoulos. And so she's still there today. So the land, water, animals, working outside, building a life. Grandma lives just up the hill from the house she was born in that her daddy built with his own hands. So that's been in my imagination, and I would go spend my summers working out there with Grandpa Dan. And so I had that history as a child, and then reading Wendell Berry, and now being a pastor, I think of myself as someone who's kind of farming, working the land, tending souls. So to me, it just made sense we had this opportunity to get the land. It made sense to start building a life like that out here.
Yeah, that's great. So you live on some land near Colorado Springs with a couple other families, right?
Yeah, my sister and brother-in-law and another family of our dear friends, we bought a 120-acre homestead together that's been in one family for 100 years. Wow. And then it was a 102-year-old man who bought it in the Great Depression. He was working it, and the family who owned it went belly up. And so he bought it. He had two sons who worked it till 97 and 98. And we bought it from the 98-year-old a few months before he passed. So it was 4 generations of people that have worked the land. So we're out here running around. We just went to the auction this week and bought some more cattle. We've raised and sold 20 different head of cattle and feeding the county around here. And people at church, they're sending me pictures of their ribeye steaks saying, thank you so much. And well, yeah, our kids are working hard and learning about life.
Yeah. How many kids are on this ranch?
Yeah, there's 11 kids on the ranch. We have 3 ourselves, 14, 12, and 9, but the other families have 4 kids each. And so we work together on projects, and it's a good way to grow up, I think.
Well, that's fun. I love your little working ranch ordinance for the kids. Earn your shower, earn your dinner, earn your sleep.
Yeah. We say that we have failed as parents if our kids don't come in dirty and hungry and tired. And kids got all the wiggles and the energy and the adrenaline. And so we have projects that the other day I sent the boys out to go down into the creek and gather all the dry wood they can find for kindling to get our fire started. And we were chopping wood last week, so we've got a big wood stack and we've got a kindling stack, and they come in. And one night, fun story, my daughter, she was 12 at the time, so 2 years ago, I said, kids, be at the dinner table 6 o'clock, hands washed. The dinner will be hot and ready at 6. Yes, sir. They go run and they're playing with their cousins and friends. 6 o'clock, my brother-in-law calls from across the way, across the ranch. And so I go, hey, David. And it was Lily, my daughter. She said, Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be about 20 minutes late to dinner. And I was immediately kind of frustrated, like I told you. That's what I was thinking in my head, but I didn't say it. And I said, Lillian, what's the deal? And she said, well, Dad, I'm not done castrating the piglets yet. And I've got to finish castrating them and then suturing them up. And so I'm about 20 minutes late. Yes, ma'am. I thought, when did I think my 12-year-old daughter would be 20 minutes late to dinner because she wasn't done suturing up the castrated piglet? So they know about life. They know how it works. No freshman boy is going to say something to knock her off her spot. She's seen it all, and she knows how to castrate,
Well, okay, so you have put down roots. Your book is about putting down roots, about choosing to be obligated, right? Mm-hmm. Choosing to limit your scope in some ways. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. We live in a moment in time that thinks If you want to be great, you have to transcend the limitations of your boring little life. Mm-hmm. If you want to make a mark on the planet, you have to rise above. You have to escape the confines, and so we're bristling against the very real lives that God has called us to live, and we think that it's a problem. But the saints have always understood that limitation is holy and that it's good for us. And the saints are always from somewhere. Think about it. Like, you've got Saint Hildegard of Bingen, you've got Saint Augustine of Hippo, you've got Saint Francis of Assisi. Yeah, on and on.
Aquinas is not his last name; it means he's from Aquina.
Yeah. So, and you've got Bernard of Clairvaux, you've got Teresa of Calcutta. Like, the saints are always from somewhere, and that comes from Jesus Christ of Nazareth. God, who comes to bring salvation to us, does not sprinkle fairy dust from the heavenly balconies. He moves into a particular place with particular people. He becomes small to do big salvation work. And so, yes, I do think the way forward for us is to fall back in love with the particularities and the confines of our lives, to settle into that. And all the people who made a big dent started so unspectacularly local. And we look back on it in history through rose-colored glasses and think that, they just lived these beautiful transcendent. No, they lived very confined, faithful lives rooted in the particular soil of their place. And over time, we discover that to be the real beautiful work. So I do think we could just settle in. And frankly, I think it would help us with our anxiety. I think it would help us. We are medicating at a rate that is just unbelievable historically. We are the deepest pockets of any society in history, and maybe the most relationally bankrupt. We're medicating it some way. We're hurting, and I think if we could slow down and settle into our small lives, we would find deep fulfillment, we would find greater fruitfulness, and we would sleep better at night.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you were quoting probably Barry or if this was you. You say generalization is the death of intimacy and abstraction of the arch enemy of love.
Yeah. Let's take for an example, I say somewhere like, generalization, like, I don't love women, I love my wife. It's a problem to generalize. It's a problem to abstract. I don't love women. I love Lisa Carol Wakely Grothe, who was born on May 27th, 1981. And she brought into the world Lillian Wilson and Wakely. And when I can focus my love, when I can focus my attention, when I can focus my affection, when I can put my hands in the soil of those four lives and let that be the most important investment I make in the world in my lifetime, then I can change the world. But we want to change the world in abstractions. We want to run off and do some grandiose thing out there, this global mark, and it just doesn't work. The way you make the mark is by moving from abstraction and generalization into particularity and into focused intimacy. And so I think what we're doing today, I'm watching people. I'm 39. I'm as old a millennial as you can be. I'm watching people younger than me falling into the temptation of wanderlust. I'm just going to run down to Austin. I'm going to check it out. And then, after 3 years there, they weren't really feeling my vibe. And I got to go off to LA because I got to write my own story. And then I'm going to go to New York, and then maybe I'll run. And you look up after 10 years and you've paid your bills the whole time, but you have nothing to show for it. You don't have any relational rootage. And I think this kind of conversation that we're having about the power of place and choosing stability will actually help us redefine what true riches are. We live in a society that says you're rich if you have a lot of money, or you're rich if you've got a roof over your head, or you're rich if you've paid your bill. No, saints of old, philosophers, anthropologists, theologians, artists have said that you're rich if you have a community of affection around you. You're rich if your children have extended aunties and uncles like Jonathan Rogers, who can encourage them and speak life over them and jerk the slack out when they're being punks. You're rich if you've got the elderly who have little kids checking in on them. And you're rich if you're a little kid that has an elderly person imparting to you the wisdom that they fought to gain. It's social capital, not just financial capital. And so I think this conversation on place can help us really rediscover what true riches are.
Yeah, you're really unapologetic in this book about the idea of obligation, right? That you need to obligate yourself.
Yes.
And I love that idea. That instead of saying I'm gonna keep my options open, hey, when you're looking at the menu, your options are open, but you're still hungry.
I love that. Yeah. Obligation. I show up and I tell my kids when we go to church, I'm a pastor, and I'm not saying this because I'm a pastor. I'm saying this because I'm a Christian. Kids, when we go into church, keep your eyes open. God is going to send you people who need encouragement, who need help, who need someone to come alongside them. They may need money. And kids, we've got a little money, and if God shows us someone who needs it, we don't have to pray about that. That's something we do. We are on the hook for the people God has put right in front of us. I can't change what's going on in Cambodia very well. I can't change what's going on in the Bronx very well. I can't change what's going on in Dallas, Texas. I can change what's happening in my little sphere of influence, the smallest concentric circle with my family and with our congregation and with our little region of our city. And so the single parents that come to our church, I feel responsible for them. Mm-hmm. I feel responsible to them. And if I get a little extra scratch coming in from a speaking engagement or something that I do, and it just, I got paid for something recently, and Lisa just said to me, that's not for us. Mm. And I said, you're exactly right. And so we went to the bank and put the check in and cashed it, and we just kept it in our truck, and we were looking for, I'm not saying that Daniel's awesome. I'm saying that's what Christians have always done. Yeah. We are obligated to one another. We are the body of Christ. And if one member of the body is hurting, we all are hurting. Mm-hmm. And if more people, we live in an age of non-committal generality. I don't want to know. We want to know what's happening in the world, but we don't want to be responsible for what's happening right in front of us. Yeah. And I think we ought to do the exact opposite, right. Press in to the place right in front of us.
I've been thinking a lot about Micah 4:4. Everyone will sit under their own vine, and their own fig tree, and no one's going to make them afraid.
Yes.
The Lord has spoken it. And, there are so many ways to get afraid, for instance, when instead of tending to our business, I recently planted a fig tree. That's part of the reason I started thinking of this verse.
I love that.
But the, as our culture sort of takes us away from the place where we are to the things we can't do anything about. It's terrifying to think about all those things I can't do anything about.
Exactly.
But it's not quite so terrifying to think I've got neighbors. And
Jonathan, you are saying what we need to recover. You're like, I just read a study recently that with social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then just 24/7 news cycle, mm-hmm. we human beings used to hear like one bad story a day about like, oh my gosh, someone's got cancer.
Yeah.
Or
broke their leg.
Someone broke their leg. Someone we know is off at the war, and we heard they got hurt. Holy smokes. And we would carry that, and we would sit with that. And that used to be the human way. We would hear one really overwhelming story a day. We are hearing minimum hundreds of terrible stories a day. Yeah. Seeing the story, this family, and oh my gosh, and this homeless person on the side of the road in Cleveland, and this story of a tsunami that hit over there, and then a tornado that hit over there, and it is overwhelming us to the point of inaction.
Yeah.
So we're aware of what's happening in Cambodia. We're aware of what's happening in South Sudan. We're aware, and thank God for news in that kind of way. Mm-hmm. But actually what it's doing is it's crushing us to where we're not even able to help our neighbor.
Yeah.
So what if we flip that in the exact opposite direction? And I'll give you a story. Last week, it was right before Thanksgiving, and a man in the congregation heard me preach about our obligations to one another. And he came up to me the next day and he handed me 10 envelopes. And he said, I don't want anyone to know who I am. I understand that you're aware of needs in our congregation. Go make it happen. And each envelope had 10 $100 bills in them. So he gave me $10,000. And we went door to door, my wife and I, on Wednesday before Thanksgiving to 10 families in our congregation and said, hey, we understand that this is going on. One man, his wife just died this year, 43 years old, of cancer, got 5 kids. We walk in his living room the day before Thanksgiving. He's trying to figure out how to buy Christmas gifts. And we said, hey, man of God, I buried his wife. I love this family, known him for a long time. And I said, someone in our congregation heard that you needed help. And he felt by the Spirit of God that this money's not his, this money's yours. And he starts sobbing. And we had 10 stories on that Wednesday. It's because someone understood that to be a believer in Jesus Christ is not to escape into our abstraction or to escape into our own self-protectionism, but it's actually to press in to the very real needs right in front of us, to be obligated. And if we could do this, if we could go micro, mm-hmm. the world would be changed on a macro scale by a bunch of people going micro.
Yeah. Okay. This is a podcast about writing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about how some of these ideas about being local, being micro, being specific, being mm-hmm. obligated,
yeah,
affect or shape the writing life or the creative process or just creative work.
Yep.
And by the way, I define creative work very broadly, right? I mean, I think cooking is creative work. I mean, not just I think, it is, right? It is. Anything that's telling a truer story. Yes. About what's true and real and what's good and beautiful.
Yeah.
So anyway, some of the things you've been talking about, it seems to me the more there's something counterintuitive for the creative life, perhaps, about as I'm more obligated to my local life.
Yeah.
How am I going to find time to write? How am I going? I mean, part of the truth is, for a writer, one of the things you're trying to do is reach out to people who aren't in your immediate circle.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the reason I publish it is so that people who don't live in my neighborhood can actually see it.
Exactly. And you as a writer or a creator telling the very specific story of your very particular life throws open imaginative possibilities for your reader. Mm-hmm. Annie Dillard is one of my favorite writers, and I feature her in the book in one chapter. And Annie Dillard notices everything. Yeah. I mean, I just can't even believe how she's able to pay such attention to detail. And when I read Annie Dillard, it's like a burning bush experience for me because I start seeing things that I didn't see before. She is like a tonic to the imagination. She cleanses, purifies, and reawakens, and creates new possibilities. So one of these single moms, I went into her house on Wednesday with Lisa the day before Thanksgiving with cash for her. I walked into her little apartment and there's stuff crammed everywhere. And she's got a freezer in the corner of her living room with Powerates all surrounding it and on top of it. And I immediately think to myself, this is a woman who's had to fight for her two children for 20 plus years. No one else. She has no family, no parent, no one else. And I thought, this is the living room of a woman who has had to save every single shred of provision to take care of her little brood. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, she's going to have a freezer in the corner of the living room and Powerades stacked all around it. And she probably bought those Powerades in bulk because she had a little extra cash one day and thought, well, I may not have cash next time, and I got to get my boy what he needs for practice. So we can go into that. I can say I went into a lady's apartment, or I can say I walked in and it was pitch black in there, not a blind was opened, and she was closed in from the world, and I noticed the freezer in the corner with the Powerade stacked all around it and the vacuum in the corner, and she was in her bathrobe draped around her shoulders. And like, this is what writers and creators do. They wake the reader up to the world. So the very particular life that you are living becomes a gateway into people discovering and falling back in love with the very particular lives that they live.
Yeah. Flannery O'Connor says one country has to do for all countries, right? She wrote about her own little country, Middle Georgia, and that's the only route to the universal, right? The universal, the only path to the universal is through the local and the specific.
Or other people have said, like Flannery, write what only you can write. Mm-hmm. And write it in the way that only you can write it. Write it in your voice. And in doing so, somehow it becomes a universal gift.
Mm-hmm. It's a mystery.
Yep.
You say that God is a materialist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that. Where have I run across that before? Have I run across that somewhere else?
I've never run across it. So I thought I was saying something unique there. If someone else has said it, great, but I promise you I wasn't plagiarizing.
Yeah, right. What do you mean? What do you mean by that when you say that God is a materialist?
We think of God as some sheer force of deity in the sky that is amorphous, an amorphous blob of power. God. And you open Genesis 1, that's not at all what you see. What you see is God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. You see God checking the herbs and the trees and the vegetation and dreaming. And you know what we need over here in this section of the garden? We need this. And we see God putting his hands in the dust of the earth and bending down and collecting together a little cadaver of nothingness and breathing the breath. Like there was an investment of ruach into, and consciousness cracks open, and God is playful and God is imaginative, and he goes and he finds Adam and Eve hiding behind the tree when they were caught, when their consciences struck them. And then we look at Jesus. He's out making fish for his boys on the shore. And he's breaking bread and there's crumbs everywhere. And he's drinking wine and he's confused with a drunkard and a glutton because he's going from house to house partying. And he's grabbing water and dousing people. And he's grabbing mud and rubbing it in the blind man's eyes. And Jesus is an unabashed materialist. And so I wanted to say it that way as a way of trying to wake up the reader that God is not some distant spiritual deity in the skies that we have to sort of, channel our greatest voodoo to access. God is available to us right here, right now. And the walk I went on this morning with my bride, with our 4 dogs, we live out on a ranch. We got 4 dogs. It's malpractice not to have 4 dogs. We got the dogs running everywhere and spooking the deer out. And I'm out there crunching the grass underneath my feet going, come Holy Spirit, have your way today on earth as it is in heaven. God is a materialist.
You use that phrase in the chapter about Wendell Berry, and there's that great passage in I think it's in Jayber Crow where Wendell Berry talks about preachers might fulminate against the flesh. But then look at them at lunch. Nobody believes it, right? I mean, because and then that's a great passage, by the way, in which he just lists items of food.
Yes,
and that material reality of the feasting table, yes. Awakens us. You've already said something about the right kind of writing awakens us to things, and I love that list of fried chicken and biscuits and beans and I thought about that passage also with regard to what you did quote from Barry. That is, this idea that God didn't start loving the world at John 3:16.
Yes, exactly. This is not new. Yeah. This is the beginning of our story: flesh and bone and brokenness and strong appetite, yeah. and desire and passion, flesh, and of course it's got to be channeled and redeemed and cooperated with. Work with the grain of the universe. Don't go against it; it'll break you. But us retreating from our very fleshly lives is not the way forward. It's pressing in. And what are the greatest moments that we remember? The greatest moments, I can take you to Grandma Wheezy. The first thing I do when I go into her house, I'm a 39-year-old man with 3 kids of my own. I go in, I take off my shirt, I lay on the couch, and she comes over and she starts scratching my back. Only Grandma Wheezy can. There is no human on the planet who can scratch a back like Grandma Wheezy. And then she runs in and she's got her biscuits and gravy on the stove and she's chasing me around with a fork the whole time. Holding my child for the first time, watching Lily and Carol Grothe breathe under the hot lamp 20 minutes after she's been born. And I just collapse. That's not side work in the kingdom of God.
Yeah, right.
And Jesus took the bread and he broke it and he gave it to them. And he said, "This is my body." And he gave them the cup of new wine. And he said, "Here you go, drink up, y'all. This is a guarantee for forgiveness of sins." Jesus is not running away from the flesh. Jesus is teaching us to press into it. And so God is a materialist. And our writing, as we're doing it well, we will help people come back alive to the realities all around them when we do it well.
Yeah. This is not a quote, it's a paraphrase from Barry. When we discover how much God loved the world, we begin to discover our calling to pay attention, to love the world and give it our full attention, to notice its beauty, and to be enraptured by its mysteries.
Yeah.
I mean, as you pay attention, now we're back to writing now. As you pay attention, you've got something to write about.
Yes. And people are dying for this.
Mm-hmm.
People are dying to be, we live in an age of disincarnation.
Yeah.
We got our screens. We have every reason to run from the fleshy, physical, materialistic lives. We bring people out here to the ranch, and we've got 6 horses out here. My brother-in-law is just a cowboy, and we bring these kids who live in apartments, and they haven't been out because they've been locked down for 2 years, and they come out here, and the horse's tail is whacking them, and there's flies, and the little pigs are running all over the place, and the kids get to try to wrestle them and pick up the kids. And what do? They laugh. They laugh for hours, and you don't have to teach kids how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
They know there's no manual for how to live outside. You just do it. But as we get older and as we get more technologically savvy, we forget. And so I think it's our invitation to bring people back into the details of their lives.
I wouldn't want to minimize the sins of the flesh, of course, but I'm more concerned about the sins of fleshlessness these days.
You better say it, man. I was so nervous to mess something up. When I grew up I love my upbringing. My parents are amazing, pastors, faithful. They taught me the scriptures. There was a Christian subculture in Tulsa, Oklahoma that I grew up in that was just scared of messing anything up. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we don't smoke and we don't chew and we don't go with girls that do. Mm-hmm. And you don't drink, and I mean, like, that's all the terrible stuff, and you're going to hell if you do all that stuff. And we were just so suspicious mm-hmm. of the gifts God had given to us. So it's time, I think, to swing the pendulum back to the middle. Sure, there are these extreme poles out here. It can destroy you, but also, if the overuse of it can destroy you, but the underuse or the inattention to can shrivel up the soul as fast as giving yourself over to it. So finding the gift right in the middle. There's gifts all around us. Will we have eyes to see it?
Yeah. Look in the world. Is it Capon talks about looking the world back to beauty? Paying attention, right? I mean, it's ennobling. Is ennobling the right word? I mean, when you say, I've paid attention to this, I've noticed it, and I just wrote it down for you, you are acknowledging the nobility in whatever it is that you just wrote about, or the person you just wrote about, or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, we're about to run out of time, but I want to talk about Annie Dillard for a minute, because you devote a chapter in your book to Annie Dillard, and I didn't know this story about her reading a book by Henry Beston, Life on a Northern Farm, or something like that, which seems like a great topic for a book, right? A naturalist, and she hated it. She thought it was so boring and uninteresting.
Yep.
And her writing career was sort of an answer to that. To that. And so she, here's this person has this great topic, this great, Northern Farm, and I haven't read that book, but Dillard seems to think he failed, and then she writes Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and as you said, the amazing thing about Tinker Creek is how unamazing it is if you're not paying attention.
Yes.
The place itself. The book is amazing, and it's about a place that you and I wouldn't pay much attention to.
Exactly. So she's reading this book by Henry Beston, Life on a Northern Farm, and she writes in her journal, like, this is some world-class naturalist. Henry Beston she's got this understanding what it's going to be. She comes to it, she writes in her journal, why I didn't like this book. It was a bore. Not only did nothing happen okay, but there was no trace of mind. As a naturalist, he didn't teach me a thing. He didn't even bother to look up fireflies. As an observer of the social scene, which is a boring thing to be in the first place, he's ordinary and conservative, no imagination. And so she says in her journal, she essentially says, I can do better than that. Mm-hmm. And it sets her on a track. This book that she had high hopes for, that was just an absolute waste of time with no imagination. She says the world deserves better than that. And so she goes on this writing journey, and she's a stay-at-home mom mm-hmm. in her late 20s. And in that same journal, she writes, she's just despairing. She's depressed. She's ready to quit. She goes, who will ever read this stay-at-home mom? I have nothing to give. She knew she was a great writer, but she didn't think anyone would be interested in her. So she starts going down to a little creek, Tinker Creek. And she walked from her little row home in a boring suburb, Roanoke, Virginia. No one wants to be in Roanoke. And what shocked me about Tinker Creek, I didn't know this until I started studying. I read her and I think of her as some sort of out in, John Muir, out in the great wilderness, the parks, Yosemite and Glacier. And no, she's walking from her row home as a stay-at-home mom down to Tinker Creek, where there's construction workers smoking in the corner and there's school buses blazing by, and there's an ambulance picking up a lady with COPD, and there's ducks and there's trash, and it's not a sexy scene. And what does she do? She takes a little suburb and she re-enchants the world. She turns a humdrum neighborhood into holy ground. She helps us start to see past our first glance of what Tinker Creek is. And she shows us the burning bush that is there always, if we will only have eyes to see it.
Yeah. I'm about to ask you this question in a minute because it's always my last question for all these episodes. But the question, which I'm not asking you yet, is who are the writers who make you want to write? Mm-hmm. And I love that story, that the writer that made Annie Dillard want to write was somebody who she thought the world deserved better than what she had seen. I love boring books about interesting topics. They make me want to go, do something with it.
They challenge you. Wake up, rise up, do better.
Yeah. All right. Now I am going to ask you the question. Who are the writers who make you want to write, Daniel?
The writers that make me want to write, Eugene Peterson, Wendell Berry, Mary Oliver, Toni Morrison, first Black female laureate, Nobel laureate. Just, my gosh.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Henry Nouwen, Thomas Merton, Ross Gay, a poet.
Yeah. I love. What's that? The Book of Gratitude. What's his long poem that he? Mm-hmm. Is it the Book of Gratitudes?
I think so.
Yeah.
Brian Doyle.
Man.
Brian Doyle. God Almighty! I wish he was still alive. We lost him way too soon. The One Long River of Song. If any of you are looking for an entry point into, just these long run-on sentences that just awaken the soul. So find people.
That essay of his about hummingbirds is just one of the best things I've ever seen.
It is. So those are the people that just top of mind move me.
You need to track down Margaret Rankle, Renkl. She's a nature writer, kind of in the vein of Doyle. She lives in Nashville, and check her out. All right, man, we better wrap it up there.
Jonathan, thanks so much for all your
a lot of fun.
Podcast listeners in the Rabbit Room Network. God bless you. Be well, write, and change the world.
Thanks, Daniel.
This podcast is brought to you by the Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.